Good morning, brethren, and welcome to our bi-weekly program entitled The Word in a Glimpse, which is broadcast live on Facebook every Monday and every Wednesday at 8 a.m. West Africa time, which is 7 a.m. GMT. Today is Wednesday, the 24th of May, 2023, and our topic is entitled Don't Take Hereditary Ties Lightly. Don't take hereditary ties lightly. Part 1. So we're going to start this teaching today and continue with the same teaching on the coming Monday. Let's first read the book of Exodus chapter 20. Exodus chapter 20, verses 4 and 5. Exodus chapter 20, verses 4 and 5. You shall not make for yourself a carved image, any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them nor serve them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children to the third and fourth generations of those who hate me. What interests us the most is the last part of our scripture that we read. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children to the third and fourth generations of those who hate me. Let's also read 2 Kings. 2 Kings chapter 5. 2 Kings chapter 5. Let's read verse 27. 2 Kings chapter 5 verse 27. Therefore, the leprosy of Naaman shall cling to you and your descendants forever. And he went out from his presence leprous, as white as snow. So here is the first part of the verse. Therefore, the leprosy of Naaman shall cling to you and your descendants forever. You see, every individual born after Adam and Eve is part of a generational chain. The generational chain links the individual to people before him and people after him. So every individual derives from two individuals who also themselves derive each from two other individuals, and so forth. So this generational chain is not only a chain for the transmission of life, but it is also a chain for the transmission of many other things, from parents to children, from children to grandchildren, and so on and so forth. A curse, for example, we read about the curse that Elisha said for Naaman, for Gehazi. So a curse, for example, can become generational and move from grandparents to grandchildren, and so on. Thus, a curse can be transmitted from generation to generation. A disease can be transmitted from generation to generation. Certain behaviors can be transmitted from generation to generation. Certain character traits, certain social situations even, and so on, can also be transmitted from generation to generation. Such transmission from parents to children and from children to grandchildren, such transmission from generation to generation sets a generational tie, a tie that connects an individual to both his ancestors and his descendants. This tie is physically invisible. It is spiritual. Even though this tie may concern the transmission of physical elements, such as a disease or a deformity, or such as a disease like Gehazi's leprosy. The tie that is responsible for this transmission of physical elements is always spiritual. So the generational ties are always spiritual. Generational ties are hereditary ties. They are just the same. When we talk of generational ties or when we talk of hereditary ties, we are talking of the same thing. So a spiritual tie remains active as long as it is not broken. And since it is a spiritual bond, it is also spiritually that it has to be broken. You cannot take a machete to cut a spiritual tie. It's not possible. And as long as the spiritual tie is not broken, that or the thing which this tie transmits from generation to generation will always reproduce itself from generation to generation. And even if it happens that the manifestations of the transmitted element don't appear in any generation, it might not appear in one or two or even three or more generations, they can always appear one or more generations later if the link that transmits it, if the tie that transmits it has not been cut off, has not been broken, has not been suppressed. There are a few examples in the Word of God of the transmission of some character traits and some behaviors from generation to generation. There are many examples of those kinds of or situations of generational ties. We are just going to see some of them, to talk about some of them, just to show that a generational tie that is not broken remains active, and that we must not take lightly this notion of generational ties, of hereditary ties. Let's first read in the book of Genesis chapter 38. Genesis chapter 38. Let's read verses 13 to 29. Genesis chapter 38, verses 13 to 29. It's a very long text, but we're going to read it to understand well. And it was told Tamar, saying, Look, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep. So she took off her widow's garments, covered herself with a veil, and wrapped herself, and sat in an open place which was on the way to Timnah. For she saw that Shelah was grown, and she was not given to him as a wife. When Judah saw her, he thought she was a harlot, because she had covered her face. Then he turned to her by the way and said, "Please let me come in to you." For he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. So she said, "What will you give me that you may come into me?" And he said, "I will send a young goat from the flock." So she said, "Will you give me a pledge till you send it?" Then he said, "What pledge shall I give you?" So she said, "Your signet and cord, and your staff that is in your hand." Then he gave them to her, and went into her, and she conceived by him. So she arose and went away, and laid aside her veil, and put on the garments of her widowhood. And Judah sent the young goat by the hand of his friend, the Adulamite, to receive his pledge from the woman's hand, but he did not find her. Then he asked the men of that place, saying, "Where is the harlot who was openly by the roadside?" And they said, "There was no harlot in this place." So he returned to Judah and said, "I cannot find her." Also the men of the place said, "There was no harlot in this place." Then Judah said, "Let her take them for herself, lest we be shamed. For I sent this young goat, and you have not found her." And it came to pass about 3 months after that Judah was told, saying, "Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has played the harlot. Furthermore, she is with child by harlotry." So Judah said, "Bring her out and let her be burned." When she was brought out, she sent to her father-in-law, saying, "By the man to whom this belongs, I am with child." And she said, "Please determine whose these are, the signet and cord and staff." So Judah acknowledged them and said, "She has been more righteous than I, because I did not give her to Shelah my son." And he never knew her again. Now it came to pass at the time for giving birth that, behold, twins were in her womb. And so it was, when she was giving birth, that the one put out his hand, and the midwife took a scarlet thread and bound it on his hand, saying, "This one came out first." Then it happened, as he drew back his hand, that his brother came out unexpectedly. And she said, "How did you break through? This breach be upon you." Therefore his name was called Perez. Now let's read Ruth chapter 4. Ruth chapter 4, verses 18 to 22. Ruth chapter 4, verses 18 to 22. Now this is the genealogy of Perez. Perez begot Hezron, Hezron begot Ram, and Ram begot Amminadab. Amminadab begot Nahshon, and Nahshon begot Solomon. Solomon begot Boaz, and Boaz begot Obed. Obed begot Jesse, and Jesse begot David. And let's read 2 Samuel chapter 13. 2 Samuel chapter 13. Chapter 13. We're going to read verse 1, then verses 11 to 14. After this, Absalom, the son of David, had a lovely sister, whose name was Tamar, and Amnon, the son of David, loved her. That is verse 1. Verses 11 to 14 now. What is it? Now, when she had brought them to him to eat, he took hold of her and said to her, "Come, lie with me, my sister." But she answered him, "No, my brother, do not force me, for no such thing should be done in Israel," and so on. And I, where could I take my shame? Now, verse 14, let's go to verse 14. However, he would not heed her voice, and being stronger than she, he forced her and lay with her. So we see in the first reading that the son of Jacob, had incestuous sexual intercourse with his daughter-in-law, Tamar. And from this incest was born Perez. In fact, there were born two, Perez and Zerah, but it's Perez who interests us mainly. So from this incest was born Perez. And after this, Judah and Perez went down to Egypt with Jacob and settled there. The descendants of Judah and Perez dwelt for 430 years in Egypt. And later on, they spent 40 years in the wilderness on their way back to Canaan, their promised land, the promised property. So this gives us a total of 470 years. And among the descendants of Perez who returned from Egypt to settle in Canaan, there was one Solomon who eventually married Rahab, the former prostitute, the former harlot of Jericho. And Solomon and Rahab gave birth to Boaz, King David's great-grandfather. Therefore, we see that King David descends from an incestuous line. He descends from the line of Perez. And David, in turn, fathered children, many children. And among these many children were Amnon and Tamar. Yet the tie of incest that Judah had woven while having sexual intercourse with his own daughter-in-law Tamar had never been broken. This tie of incest, therefore, continued to be active in Judah's and Perez's descendants to the point of having manifestations after more than 5 centuries, more than 500 years, in the house of King David, who not only descended from Judah, the author of the incest, but also from Perez, the fruit of the incest. This is how this bond of incest took hold of David's son Amnon, who then raped his own sister Tamar. Yet the tie of incest didn't only run from Judah to Amnon. That same tie of incest also ran down from Tamar, the daughter-in-law of Judah, to Tamar, the daughter of David. So there was a double tie of incest. And David certainly didn't only have one daughter. He certainly had other daughters, I don't know. But why did not Amnon have incestuous sexual intercourse with any of his other sisters except Tamar? Why? When this girl Tamar was born, David named her Tamar. Why did he call her Tamar? I don't know. Maybe it was in remembrance for his ancestor Tamar. So was it to name her after his ancestor Tamar, the mother of his ancestor Perez? If this was the case, then David established a direct connection between his daughter Tamar and his ancestor Tamar. Thus, the tie of being a victim of an incestuous sexual intercourse ran down from Tamar, the mother of Perez, to Tamar, the daughter of David. You must always be careful for the names that you give your children and after whom you name your children. They might be bound to some of the characteristics of their namesake. A name is never neutral. This we have to know. Anyway, talking of the story of David, of Amnon and Tamar, there was a double tie of incest inaugurated by Judah and his daughter-in-law Tamar, and which was not yet broken, which was not yet cut off. Thus the tie was still active, and it manifested itself in the lives of Amnon, the son of David, and Tamar, the daughter of David. As long as a generational tie is not broken, it remains active generation after generation. We're going to stop here for today and continue with the same teaching next week. God bless you abundantly beyond all your expectations.